Hello, in this tutorial I'll be showing you how to draw hands. But before we start, I just want to say thank you for 13k views on my last video, and thank you for all of the wonderful comments. I was so happy reading all of them. This tutorial is going to be broken into two parts: the basic anatomy of a hand and drawing a complete hand. We're first going to talk about the basic anatomy of the hand, starting with the palm. The shape of the palm is a rectangle with a slight curve on the top. Next, for the base of the thumb, we're going to draw a triangle. The fingers are about the same length as the palm, and when you are drawing the fingers, it should follow the curvature of the hand. As you can look at your own hand, the middle finger is the tallest, ring and index are about the same at rest. Keep the fingers about the same width. The pinky is a little skinnier and also a lot shorter. Notice how your fingers start at the top and the thumb starts about halfway of the palm. A lot of beginners tend to draw the thumb too close to the finger, which is incorrect. I think the key to making hands drawing easier is to be able to imagine the palm in different angles. So if we were looking down at the palm, it would look something like this. For the thumb, you can see one side of the triangle because of the perspective, and the fingers would start from here. Even when drawing hands from different angles, you want to keep the curvature in mind. If you were to put your hand flat on the desk, the palm will lay flat. That is a no-brainer, but the palm can also curve slightly inward, and you can see this when you are making a fist. When drawing the fingers, just imagine a fry shape. Generally, the finger gets slightly thinner as you get closer to the top. The finger I'm drawing right now is the pointer finger, and it gets a little pointier at the very end. The shape of the nail is like the tip of the finger, but just skinnier. When drawing the fingers, the joint area will be thicker and is most noticeable on the middle finger. A lot of the artists I know might not draw a line to indicate a joint. Instead, they would just make the area wider. This is more noticeable on the middle finger and if the person has long and thinner fingers. And depending on the angle, you can see the nail is slightly curved too. There's a lot of different styles, but usually I just stick to the very basics and just adjust the length. The finger will start rounding off to a corner at the last half of the last joint. I'm gonna give it long nails, so her nails will be drawn past the finger. When drawing the fingers bending, the fingers at each joint can bend around 90 degrees. See this 90 degree? It just came out just like that, and that is where the crease will show. I forgot to mention that the sections at your finger are different lengths. So the first section is the longest and it keeps getting slightly shorter the further you go down. When the finger is bent, you can notice the inside is bumpy and the outside is rather straight. The fingers are also quite flexible, so you can also bend a little in the opposite direction. It can make the hands more expressive and dynamic. If you look at the back of your hand, the tendons are like an upside down triangle, and if you follow the lines further out, this is how wide the fingers can spread. There are some extra skin between the fingers, including the thumb, so the fingers can spread out. The skin will be stretched out and it would look higher. When connecting the hand to the arm, I draw a small bump to show where the hand ends. On both sides of the wrist, there is a bump and it is more noticeable on the side of the pinky. And even if the fingers are spread out, the joints will still follow the curvature of the palm. When you're looking at the palm, there are three areas that will have the most amount of muscle. To make the palm less flat, I draw some lines in those areas. I don't connect the entire line, just enough to show a crease or that the muscle is there. It's good to know where these muscles are because it can help you with the shading process. And when you are looking at the side of the hand, it wouldn't be completely flat. For example, the side of the hand is a bit thicker at the bottom. You can see some parts of the thumb, and you can see the red area curving out a bit. For the fingers, you just need to keep in mind of their height, but they are not perfectly parallel to each other, so you might see the shorter finger even from behind peeking out. I want to talk about the thumb a little bit more. So we know that the fingers can move up and down, bending about 90 degrees for each joint, including the knuckles. The thumb does the same thing, but can also turn inside about 90 degrees. And it would look something like this. Here I'm drawing a reaching hand. Notice how the thumb is turned inside. As you can see, I didn't use that many guidelines when drawing this hand. That's because I already drew this pose so many times already. Eventually, as you draw more hands, you'll use less guidelines, and this goes for anything that you draw really. And notice how I draw this finger bending slightly in the other direction. I just think it makes it more dynamic. As you may notice, the thumb also has one less joint than the rest of the fingers, but the same concept on being wider at the joint still applies. There are other minor differences, such as the thumb is less pointed than the other fingers, and it is not completely flat even when your thumb is straight. That is all for the basic anatomy of a hand. I try to go over what I think was most important. This is the first hand sheet I made, so I know what I wanted to say for the video. Hands are really complicated, so I just keep in mind that there is way more to hands than just what I talked about in this video. Before we get into how to color hands, I'm just going to quickly go over how to practice drawing hands from reference. So I first draw the rectangular shape for the palm. I try to match the angle and direction of the shape to the reference as best as possible. Then I'll draw the three main muscles on the palm so it looks more like a hand. And then for the fingers, I look for how much they are bending. For example, here it is completely vertical, same with here. I don't think there is like an order that you need to follow, but for example, like I skipped drawing the forefingers and I drew the thumb before I drew the middle finger. I think that was because since the middle finger is touching the thumb, I wanted to make sure to get the thumb correctly first. And lastly, for the arm, it's a cylinder shape that is placed behind the hand. It's optional, but I think showing how the wrist is bending gives the drawing more information or character. Like for this pose, it's very elegant, so that's the vibe I want to capture. Another way to practice drawing from reference is tracing over the image. The goal is to understand how to use shapes to draw the hand. So using previous knowledge, I'm going to use the rectangle for the palm and triangle for the thumb. And for the fingers, I just use a cylinder shape. Tracing images can be a great way to study anatomy, especially in this scenario. I can get rid of the image just to have the line or sketch that I've made. This way I can more easily focus on just the anatomy without the colors and shadows getting in the way. On the side, I drew the same exact hand without tracing. I find it much easier to copy what I've traced instead of copying from the original reference. Do not feel bad for tracing or referencing, this is just the process that you have to go through to get better. So after you have your line art, you're going to create the base color. It's usually a very pale, light reddish orange, and for every shadow or blush that you add, it will all be clipped to the base layer. So I'm looking at the reference and I can tell that the light source is on the top left. That's because the shadows left by the fingers are slightly skewed to the right. So I'm going to pick a darker and more saturated color from the base. Usually I turn the color wheel slightly to the redder side instead of orange. This way it ensures that my shadows doesn't look brown, which can make the colors muddy and unappealing. So usually I add the blush first and then the shadow on top. I guess when I was drawing this, I forgot and I had to add it in later. This isn't solely an aesthetic thing. Usually your fingertips, are slightly more red than any other area. Same with your knuckles, just maybe not as noticeable. The blush shouldn't be overpowering unless maybe your character is in the cold, so then their hands, nose, and ears would look more red than usual. This isn't usually how I shade hands. My method is much simpler, which I will show you in just a second, but a lot of things from real life do apply to stylized drawings. When it comes to shadows, you want to imagine things in 3D. For example, the top side of the finger will be in light, while the sides and the underside, which you can't see because of the pose, will be in shadow. There aren't any sharp corners for the hand, so the edges of the shadow should be soft. I like to do this with an opacity brush, but you can also use the blend tool to soften the edges. Okay, so here is a crappy drawn hand that I will be using to demonstrate how to shade hands 99% of the time. For the base, I choose a light reddish orange color that is close to white. And for the shadow, which will be clipped to this layer, I will move the color wheel to the redder side and pick a more saturated and dark color. Assume that the light is coming from the top, the thumb, and the pinky would be in shadow. I will also add some shadow on the sides to give it more depth. And then on a different layer, I add some blush, which is more saturated version of the base color, to the ends of the fingers and knuckles. Back on the shadow layer, I will draw an outline of the nail and then use the blend tool to smoothen it out. It's a very lazy and easy way to color the nails, and you can always add some shine to it after. For the knuckles, I use a lighter version of the shadow color I picked to give it form. The knuckles are shaped kind of like diamonds, and I would shade only one side of that diamond. For the tendons, I would extend the shadows from the knuckles down a bit. And there you go, that is how I shade hands. Anyways, I hope this tutorial helped you with drawing hands. Feel free to comment down below for tutorial suggestions. And thank you so much for watching. Until next time, bye!